morning and welcome to this special edition of News Forum. The issue we seek to address tonight is that of the progress of black Americans, or the lack of it, in such critical areas as employment, education, housing, and others. What we would like to define, to the extent we are permitted in this time frame, is from whence blacks have come, where they are now, and whither next. To help in this effort, we have invited a distinguished trio of scholars who know whereof they speak. Walter R. Allen is co-author of The Color Line and the Quality of Life in America. He is an associate professor of sociology in the Center for Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan. Have blacks as a race regressed in America, do you think, in the 80s and the 8 years since the Reagans took office?
I'd say certainly within that period of time there has been some loss in terms of ground that we had gained. And indeed, that slide had its beginnings or origins a few years before that, perhaps as early as not perhaps, certainly as early as Nixon's administration. And I would suggest that there is reason for us to be concerned about the status of black Americans, and I do have a sense that we are in peril as a community.
Yes, I do. I think if you look, say, at John Jacob and the State of Black America recently, I mean, the message that certainly came very clearly in the airwaves to many blacks was to say, you cannot make it without a Democrat in the White House, certainly, without turning to government in some way, in other words, that you don't really have strengths of your own. You don't need to deal with some of the problems in the community itself. Look outside all the time. That's not a message that you hear in the Jewish community, it's not a message you hear in the Asian community, but it is certainly an overriding message that blacks receive in this country.
I would take vigorous issue with that interpretation. As I read that report, and I presume that you've had a chance to review the report.
Let me distinguish between the report and
as I listened to their discussions during the presentation, quite the opposite message came through, because I think Jacob and that report took pains to specify that black communities now, as always, have some responsibility and are willing to assume the responsibility for their own well-being. But by the same token, that report and Mr. Jacob recognize the importance and the power of government in the determination of all our lives in this society.
Has government been a handicap, Mr. Allen, to black progress? Has it been more of a hindrance than a help?
If we adopt a long view, there have been periods in our history when the government was definitely a hindrance, because there was a time when the U.S. government simply propped up the oppressive structures that we suffered under. And in more recent times, I don't agree with the analysis which suggests that I think it's too simplistic. I think there have been some very major structural shifts in this society, and we are seeing the results of those shifts most poignantly in the cases of black Americans in the urban areas, but we see them elsewhere in the society.
I wasn't trying to suggest
we look into, say, the farmlands of Iowa, and we see people losing land and farms that have been in the family for generations. We look into Youngstown, Ohio, we see whites in large numbers being displaced from failing industries. And I think it is very simplistic and I think dangerous to explain the transition that's occurring in the economic base of this society and its consequences for black Americans by simply saying that government has been trying to do too much for black Americans.
If I have a son who is 18 years old and he is about to go to college, what should my aspirations be for him? Should I temper them? What should my kid look for in the next 5 or 10 years as a black American with a college degree? Mr. Allen, what do you feel about that, a kid who's coming out there now?
I would suggest that your aspirations for your son should be boundless, and historically in many ways that's how we've dealt with our dreams and hopes for the future. But of course there is a reality that your son will be encountering out there of the sort that Bart has referred to. It's a reality that in its worst form will hamper his aspirations and sort of clip his wings, but we simply have to target them for the highest point possible.
And I'm curious to know what responsibility, Mr. Allen, I guess I'll address this to you. Are you comfortable with the attitude of black Americans in general? And I hate to try to generalize like this, because I know it sounds like we're talking about a homogeneous group, and in fact we are not. But are you comfortable with the attitudes of black Americans now as it regards their responsibility to themselves to do for themselves as much as they can and all that they can?
This is a difficult question.
Yes,
I would say I'm comfortable on the larger part, because I believe very firmly, and I think the evidence is incontrovertible, that black Americans, as all people, are interested in furthering themselves and seeing their children fed and living in safe environments. So in terms of the attitudes in the community, that's why I really take issue with any suggestion that it's solely and completely, or even largely, about a matter of internal values and norms. Because first of all, that has not been empirically demonstrated. It's simply an assertion that's out there. And it's sort of a tune that's been picked up and played with increasing frequency. But when you look around into the lives of black Americans, you see that they are carriers of those American values. But you can only carry those values so far in the absence of jobs and opportunities and access to the society.
Mr. Allen, do you have any thoughts on what black Americans ought to be considering as it regards the upcoming political elections? And really doesn't matter anymore. There seems to be a growing number of black people who are beginning to wonder whether or not the matter of black empowerment is an issue that really ought to be pursued.
Oh, it definitely has to be pursued, and the vote does matter in this country. And I would further suggest that being ethnically solid in one's vote is a long-established tradition, and many other ethnic groups used it to great advantage. Now, the interesting thing is that a truth or a sort of solution was suggested by core black culture that was resisted by some of the leadership in the last election. When that core black group was suggesting run, Jesse, run, and literally was pressing in the direction of an independently established black political party. Now, I don't know that we should move fully in that direction, but certainly that was a very strong sentiment in the community.
Gentlemen, it is a heady issue. We didn't even try to address it all and solve all the problems, which we can't do. Mr. Butler, Mr. Allen, Dr. Landry, I certainly do thank you for taking your time to shed what little light we could. Thank you for watching.